Solidarity. I'm really excited for this conversation today with Ruby and Davy, or Davy and Ruby. I don't know which way it should go. So we're going to talk about shared leadership. And before we do that, I'm going to invite you both just to say something about who you are and who you are right now. And also probably who you've been together, because that's going to be our topic today.
Yeah, so I'm Devi Leiper O'Malley. I am Cambodian and American, but calling you from Morocco. And yeah, I think one thing I was thinking is I wanted to share with the Healing Solidarity Conference and community is, I grew up in Cambodia and with a father that worked with international development and a mother who's an activist. So I feel like that's going to come up a lot in this conference of sort of thinking about the experiences and things I've learned from both of those spaces. And I have been working with women's funds for more than a decade now. And that is how I know Ruby, because we were the co-executive directors of Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, and we continue to work together in philanthropy and also trying to cook up new creative innovations, hopefully in different sectors. To you, Ruby.
Great. Thanks, Devi. Yeah, so my name is Ruby Johnson. I'm joining the call from Sydney, Australia, which is where I'm from and where I grew up. I've sort of spent the last 7 years living between here and Oaxaca in Mexico. And I'm back here with the pandemic and just to be closer to family. And I guess Devi shared a little bit about, our joint kind of shared history with Frida. And yeah, that's been such a big part of my life. I think before, in terms of my own journey, like I, really started in many places, also a little bit in international development. I also, in activism, local activism, feminist activists working on a range of issues, but also in the last sort of 9 years have been more like a feminist funding activist, also trying to move more resources to movements and particularly to young feminist movements. And yeah, I'm continuing to do that today in a consultant capacity and also just as a co-conspirator with Devi and lots of other people. And just sort of moving the space and also trying to bring more sort of care and intentionality and a justice frame into all of the work we do.
People are always intrigued when we shared conversations in Healing Solidarity about shared leadership and leading together. And so I'm really excited to talk to you both about what you learned from that process. I was thinking this morning, how long were you co-executive directors of Frida? Was it about 5 years or was it more than that? I know it was a while.
About 6.5, I think. Six,
oh, wow,
yeah, a bit longer, but yeah.
So it's a bit
still continuing as like I was thinking about it as before this call, we're sort of collaborating, co-leading on a number of things now. So I feel like the story continues.
Yeah, you're still in, right?
So far, we're on a trajectory of like co-leaders for life.
But that is a really great outcome, I think, because it sounds like it means it worked, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something I always I feel like people, when they hear shared co-leadership, they're like, oh, it's some utopian, amazing thing. Or some people are like, oh my God, that sounds like a nightmare. Yeah. And I always feel like I want to make sure people understand that, it's like any relationship, it takes work. And it's a labor of love and care and lots of other things that we'll talk about, but it's definitely something that it's an experience and a project. I feel like it's ongoing.
Yeah, right. I love that way of thinking about it as a relationship rather than a kind of like a thing and tick, 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 you do it and that's it, right? So what was it like for you? And I don't know if you want to reflect on like how you started to work together, or what your point of reference is, but like what was it like working together? How did it shape you?
Yeah, I mean, I can share a little bit, I guess, of how I came to connect with Devi, and then like I'd love Devi to share her own story a little bit with Frida. But so I mean, I was working in Cambodia at the time, and working with UN Women, and was connected to Devi's mum, Musakur, and was just like in awe of her, and thought she was, you know, such an incredible human rights activist and doing incredible work with young women in politics. And then she said I should connect with her daughter, and that we would just really hit it off. So I actually connected with Devi, reached out to her, and then we went to have Vietnamese food, I think was the first time we had.
No, it was Mongolia restaurant. But we just that was, you know, before Frida at all. That was just us meeting for the first time. I think we talked about Frida at that time, but it wasn't really necessarily in the idea of we would become co-leaders, because the position wasn't open like that. They were calling for a coordinator, which I said, Ruby, you should, just on meeting her, I was like, you should apply, you should do it. Ruby, you can say more.
I mean, so I applied, and then after like a long time and didn't think I'd get the role, was really amazingly lucky to have that role and be offered the role. And then one of the first things that you know, people said there was that it would be a co-leadership role, and would you be open to that? And I was like, absolutely. And then I remember reaching out to Devi and sort of saying, oh my gosh, like maybe this was kind of written in the stars. You know, obviously we went through a process to do that recruitment, but it was something that could develop. And then I guess Devi felt
because when the position first opened, I was sort of in a space where I was like, I want to take a break, or I'm not sure what I want to do. And I just felt like taking on a leadership role on my own was just not what I wanted and what I was ready for at the time. But as soon as it became a co-leadership role, I was like, no, that is something I would love, or I feel fits better with where I am, because we were both like 28, 27 at the time. And I think we had a lot to say about leadership, but definitely knew that it was going to be a tough job. So as soon as it became co-leadership, that's what attracted it to me. I was already a big fan of Frida, so I was also like jumping at the chance to be able to work with Frida, but I was trying to be careful and cautious about how. And then when it became a co-leadership role and Ruby just sort of let me know, I decided to go for it. And it was good to, like, we didn't know each other that well. We had only had that lunch, but it was good to know that we had some shared context of where each other was coming from. I think that really makes a difference, to not sign up and be match made with someone you don't really know at all. So I think that also helped us.
I think also, you know, when I look back, like I feel like I've always, in all of the roles that I've had and in my working life, I've always worked with people, like been in relationship to people and had sort of, I don't know, just like collective and collaborative work, but it was something quite different to be in an organization where you're really holding, like sharing power in a role and sort of being accountable to each other and a broader community, because such, you know, participatory organization, and also to be sort of building that together and like what that fabric is, and like really be able to like sit, like our first meeting we had together in person, like in Oaxaca in Mexico, like we just got a huge blackboard and just started, you know, like coloring in of like what we thought we wanted to do and what our dreams were for the organization, and like actually able to co-create that. So it wasn't sort of like, okay, how do we divide up? It was like, what are we dreaming, and what does that look like, and what do we want to learn, and how can we support each other? And I think when the thing about co-leadership, which really has shaped me, and I think it can be shaping for so many people, is it's like an inbuilt kind of support mechanism to, I think, like see the things you're really good at in someone else and sort of have that encouragement, but also to see where you want to learn and stretch and like kind of have that self-reflection. And we were able to identify that with each other, like where do we want to grow? How can we support each other? And it's just really different when it's someone who's really in the same kind of like really has the same role as you and sort of can, I guess it's very different to like a supervisor or a coach, or it's just someone who's really kind of in it with you in a way that like no one else is. So I feel like it's a beautiful kind of thing to have that opportunity for someone to really see your work and to like co-create.
And like leadership, when it's on your own or apparently on your own, can be such a lonely place in that sense. of not getting that piece of affirmation. So I think that sounds really wonderful to me, having been someone leading something on my own in the past. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when you started co-leading Frida, it was still in quite a formative phase as well, right? So I guess there was space for that dreaming.
Yes, definitely. I think it was helpful in that way, that there was so much openness in front of us to create. So we really were building the structure together and on our own. And I think luckily we had a lot of similarities, and I think we really do like to document everything. We are a big fan of tables, and we are at least always open to we try to find the perfect technology or system or database. We do always end back on spreadsheets of some kind. But I think the fact that we still think that way was also really helpful at trying to organize our work and our lives. And, to an extent where we were sharing not just our work schedules, but all of our personal schedules and our personal goals very openly. And I think that was another good value. Something we were trying to foster at Frida is like, as part of your journey, it's not just how you show up for work, it's how you're showing up for life and how work can show up for your life. And I think for the stages that we were also in, I think, trying to plan, we both became moms during the time at Frida. I think that was also some unique coordinations that we don't really need to get into, but it's a part of working, I think, in women's organization, feminist organization too, is also being open and upfront about some of those things.
Yeah, maybe I'll just say, I mean, you're right about it being quite early stages of Frida. Like, so Amina, the founding coordinator, had done an incredible job sort of bringing it to life with the support of AWID and Central American Women's Fund. But when we started, like in 2013, it was just us, like in terms of the staff, like it was like, so the actual, like the size of the organization was a lot smaller. So there was sort of, I don't know, which kind of, it made it like easier to co-create what those dreams and work with that community to figure out where it was going. But it's also like scary because there was sort of a lot of things were not decided or didn't exist, or like even having to register an organization and like figure out where to register and like all of those things, like setting up a board, like that I think those kind of things were just like, they were all really new to us. And I think as young feminists coming into that role, like just the reality of like having the shared leadership, I think was really important, just to give like that confidence and just, I don't know, to just always bounce things off each other, I think was great. So it was still quite in the earlier stages. It's obviously changed a lot. I think the staff now is like 25, maybe more actually since I last checked. But yeah, so like big growth spurt during our time, and then continuing to just, like deepen the work as well. So yeah, lots to say.
So it's really interesting hearing how you started, and it sounds like a really positive experience. So that's wonderful. I'd be interested to hear like what you would really want to share with, say, someone who's thinking about shared leadership or thinking about how to go about it, or think about supporting others with it. Like, what are the things that people should know? And I imagine some of what might come out might be also the challenges as well as the advantages.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that the thing I would say is that it's definitely not all easy, and I think Devi sort of spoke to this a little bit, but there were absolutely moments of sort of push and pull and just navigating. Like, I think the world, I honestly feel the world has just, or our sector has changed a little bit even since we begun as co-leaders, in that it's becoming a little bit more common, or people are more comfortable with the idea of there being two executive directors. I feel like when we started, even finding literature was hard, or like there was just not a lot in terms of feminist co-leadership out there. So I think the reality is people are still adapting to that, and we'll try to have an individual frame for leadership, and we'll continue to sort of try and even unintentionally do that to you, even if you're really trying to present as a collective force. And so communication between you about how to manage that and share information and just be really transparent with each other is so important, because the world will naturally, I think, try to go to one of you or like email one of you, and just how to support the sharing of like that fluidity of information and trust, I think, is really important in a context where that happens. And I mean, I think in general, just finding really concrete ways to build trust would be one thing that I think has been really important as a learning, and finding ways to give each other feedback. I think my journey of working with Devi also, like, I learned a lot about myself and how, like, just self-reflection and how, like, things that you do impact other people. And the things I knew, but like just when you're that closely working with someone, you really learn that about yourself and sort of, I don't know, develop more awareness of boundaries. And it's like a constant learning process, I think, but like creating ways to be really radically honest in the relationship, but also with each other and to yourself about like where you're not showing up or what you're like, being authentic. I don't know. I think finding ways to do that, but like setting up like meetings, times, like just putting that in like a really concrete way into your plan. And the other thing I'd just say is like, I think it's like there's sometimes the concern about it costing more, or like it being a too much work up front to work out like how to divide the work, or, you know, just people, it can be two positions, right, if you're not job sharing. So I think, but also like really being, my honest feeling is that the value of having two people, just from what they're bringing, the different experience, background, context, and like the possibilities that that holds, but also like that what you can model in the organization about sharing power, like just making that as like the norm, that then, you know, it is kind of this collectivized process. And I think that like far outweighs any cost, honestly. Like I feel like you can't even imagine how much it shifts and transforms organizations and people, and like what is possible, I think. So just trying to like put value on those things that aren't always economic, I guess.
Yeah, I would just maybe add a few of the other concrete things, because, you know, we didn't do it on our own either. We really had some key support. And I think that's important for people to recognize and invest in themselves if they're interested in this. So, you know, from the beginning, we had, you know, we had Frida's entire advisory committee, who, you know, also were a big reason why it was a co-leadership structure. And we had two people advising us who were like Angelika Arutinyova and Anna Krikian from the beginning, sort of at the beginning, just sort of advising us in different ways. Then, you know, we hired different coaches, like Rachel Humphrey helped us do a personality test, and, you know, for what they're worth, it was helpful to just give us some language and a container to speak about some of our differences and similarities. And I mean, luckily, Ruby and I, well, we were opposites in almost everything in this personality quiz. However, we weren't like extreme opposites. We were just on the other side of the middle, which I think was also maybe a good sign of like, that's why it worked, because we complemented each other. And then, you know, we also had like a governance coach, Barbara Williams, who helped us sort through different, you know, having to get into the actual details of, you know, accountability frameworks and how, you know, we work with the board, because that was something else, luckily, we also got to like help shape, which is, I think, different from others where, you know, a board would have hired the executive. And yeah, I think some of the things Ruby said, I also want to unpack too, of just, I think with co-leadership and also just being at the age I was, or, you know, I don't think age totally matters, but when you go into co-leadership, unfortunately, there's still sometimes this thing of like, not competition, but you're always going to compare yourself with, now you have someone exactly to compare yourself with. And that's hard sometimes. And again, I think that's why the personality quizzes we did and the coaches helped us like learn how to find strength in your difference. And, you know, for me personally, I had to learn how to accept, you know, what I wasn't good at, but then realize that asking for help is really important, and that Ruby is there to ask for help, and that she was someone who gives help for sure. Like that's also what's really important is with the co-leadership structure, is that that's what you're committed to, is to help each other exactly in that way and cover for each other when, you know, life gets overwhelming and work gets overwhelming. And that's again why I love the co-leadership structure, because I think it's a better reality that we want in leadership and in this world. And I think the other things of like, there's a lot of unlearning as well, where, as I mentioned, like moving from a space of competition to a space of abundance, and moving from a place of like transaction to care. I think it was also a big part of our project. And even though that's what we wanted to do, it still like takes practice. And it's something I'm still learning today with any relationship. But I think, with the capitalist culture that we live in, you're always running after a goal, or you've been told to like keep moving, keep going, keep building. You can easily forget not to get sucked into that system. And with Frida always having to fundraise as well, and to prove, we also had a lot to prove as a new fund and as a young feminist fund. Again, that's also how you can get caught up in things, and as a leader also being you're accountable and you have to you take responsibility for a lot of things. And that's the last thing I'll say is just, I know that's also, if I hadn't had Ruby and hadn't had that co-leadership structure, I probably would have crumbled under some of that pressure a lot more. I did crumble at times, but I would have really crumbled without a co-leader.
Maybe just one thing, sorry, to add, Marianne. I mean, I think the system, just to like riff on Devi, riff on what Devi said, the system wears you down. And I think like the pressure we put on ourselves to like this idea around perfection and all of those things that you're just always trying to unlearn. I think actually like having someone who can like lift you up occasionally and just hold you and support that and really like sees your work in a different way, like is like hugely like in terms of sustainability, like just how people feel and feeling supported. Like I know for me that was just like it's so helpful, because you just sometimes we put the the world on our shoulders. And I also think even I remember a number of people when they started working at Frida, like particularly a job like Frida, it's such like an incredible organization, and you feel like you've like all of the young feminine, like this, you can't mess this up, like you really need to, it's such an incredible kind of organization. So it's just that taking someone to sort of see you and support you and like celebrate your work is like, it's really powerful, and it's a bit more intimate. And I think like the reality of like ebbs and flows, and like I think with having two people, for us it was really amazing, and the whole organization and the staff holding us, I think as we grew, but enabled us to one of us to take a step back, or to take a moment, or like to be like, I'm out, like I need a week, or the other one able to sort of step in and hold the organization, and just not feeling like feeling like you can have that, and really knowing that other person has the organization is holding that with you. So it's just like, I think in some of the publications we wrote when we were at Frida collectively, it's around it's better to bend than to break, in terms of being flexible, and like how that, I think having a co-leadership model actually enables you to be more flexible and dynamic, and just like, I don't know, like real, because people's lives, we can't always be on. And I think that supports the organization to feel held, having multiple, like, two people that are really supporting that, and everyone behind it.
Yeah, I'm interested in you've mentioned it already, but maybe just a bit more about how that having that co-leadership maybe might help promote also kind of shared power in the rest of the organization. I don't know whether you've got like examples or reflections on that, but it seems to me, listening, like it could be really powerful in that way. And I know one of you's already mentioned it, but just in kind of helping us to move beyond this idea of sort of hierarchy in our organizations more generally as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that commitment preceded us, because it's a participatory fund, so we knew we had to share power, and then definitely that's something we tried to build over time. And I think also with the co-leadership, you also have to recognize that you're not going to do everything. You can't do everything. Mm-hmm. So that's the same way as when you build the rest. It's really recognizing that position and that person who's going into that position being able to like own the work themselves, and like us to trust them. And there were different ways we built it. Most, Ruby, you can share from your team, but I would say also, you know, as we left, we were also trying to build a larger senior management level, which is, you know, we left, you know, a year after it was officially created. So you'll have to talk to them and Mahendra about it. But you know, I think that's another project in itself of just like how you create flatter structures to share power. And, you know, they all have their own experience too of what that would be like. And I think the things we were trying to leave them is also just how you, and they were demanding of us too, of just how you make it really clear about who's responsible and who's accountable and when do we have a collective decision to make. And that's also something we hired some support for. Just to name names to thank them. Alia Lalu came in to help us understand how to do like collaborative decision making and, you know, the pitfalls of that, the more collaborative you try to make it, and, you know, trying to be very direct and distinct about when it is like a vote versus a consensus versus like, I'm actually just getting information from you and I'm going to make the decision. And I mean, I don't think that there's an end to that process. I think for any organization, you're constantly needing to discuss that, and what might work one day changes the next. But again, with co-leadership and with wanting to commit to shared leadership, you commit to talking about that and communicating about that as much as you need to.
Yeah. So it can't, it has to be visibilized or named at least. Maybe visibilized is the wrong word, but named so that people know, rather than what I think does often happen in organizations, that those distinctions aren't actually very clear, like we're consulting you, but actually it's my decision, or, you know, we're sharing in this decision, but actually at the end there's somebody who is going to override it or whatever. So yeah, I think that's really helpful.
I think the other thing I'd just say, there were like in the roles, like across the organization and at the board level, like we tried to also build in like 2 people, like as a very basic kind of, so at the board level, like chairs of the board, and like that was done after, you know, we initially had 1 and then we built in the second, and also within like a lot of the areas of the work, actually, like almost within most teams in the organization, it happened a bit organically, and then with intentionality as well, of supporting people to sort of be in conversation, support their shared leadership in the programs team as well, with the 2 programs leads now, Yavanna and Maria. Like that was absolutely like kind of drawing on and modeling from some of the co-leadership experience Devi and I had. Like we had meetings to kind of share what we learned, and so it was quite intentional of trying to like weave that into the structure. And I'd say even in the advisory as well, like it came up with people sort of shared leadership models. So I think as we found it was really working and like really aligned to who Frida, you know, was, and also what we all were needing in that point in our life as well, we just tried to weave it in wherever we could, basically.
Yeah, beautiful. I think yeah, it sounds like it really kind of fits with Frida's values, and I was wondering if there's any way in which it felt like it challenged them, or, you know, was there any kind of sense of like, this doesn't fit so well in some way, or and I suppose a related question, like, is it always 2 that works well, or is it the sharing that's important, and could you share with more people and have the same kind of effect? You know, is it about the pair?
I don't have the answer to that. I feel like it's an interesting question, and I think it would be great to look at, you know, different models. And I know one organization running out of Mexico, Oaxaca, they have 3. I'd love to, like, I think it's like 3 executive directors, I think, consortio. But like, it would be good to look at, I don't know, who's doing what and what's working. And I think anything can work, honestly. I think with the right kind of recipe and people and intentionality and resources behind it. But yeah, maybe there's got to be some limit. I don't know. But I think it's more around the kind of essence and sharing of power and like communication and trust and those, and self-reflection and like self-awareness. And I don't know. But what do you think, Devi? I don't know. It would be harder, I guess.
No, I think that we don't necessarily have the answer. and it's really about the people in it who are creating it. So yeah, I think it could be. I think that sometimes the challenge is that when we share power, I feel sometimes you can, because it's really hard to make decisions in an organization. There are times where, you know, you can rely on the sharing of power to avoid a decision and still arrive at no decision. And I think something that I've heard in recent months that really resonated with me is like, we don't have to agree, we have to make a decision. And there's a difference. And I think that's really hard. And especially in a participatory fund too. And, you know, we want, or just how you conduct your life, you want to hear everybody's and make sure you want people who are involved and are going to be affected by the decision to be involved in the decision. But then when it comes time to make the decision, it's somewhat hard. And again, that's why I was mentioning that we had some people come in to explain to us what decision making is. We, you know, sometimes relied on some of the existing tools of like RACI. We changed the acronym, but, you know, trying to distinguish when someone's responsible, accountable, included, or consulted, different support. We never finished those tables because they got a bit overwhelming, but at least there was always a good start. And again, it just goes back to how you negotiate and are open about what you have in front of you, like around decisions about who's best placed to do what, where there is a power dynamic maybe that needs to surface or be named and discussed. I just think it's like a pathway to the world we want.
Yeah.
And so I can't really think of something that's not aligned. Also, just for your other question around like freedom, I was like, I actually don't think I can. Maybe there is something, but it feels like so it just makes sense, right? So I think that was like I think so. I also wanted to say that I know that we sort of don't have a lot of time, but something that I think is interesting with Devi and I and the history of the way we did it, also just the time zones and working virtually. And I think now that a lot of people are in a situation where they're grounded or they're not able to travel and are working remotely that maybe haven't been before. And just to say, I think it is possible to do it remotely. We did it most of the time in our 6-7 years. We did it with 12 or 14 hours time difference, like between Korea and Mexico, Cambodia and Australia, like, I mean, all sorts of combinations. But yeah, so I think it was more around just to name that as well, around it was hard, but I think anything is possible in terms of distance as well.
And I was gonna pick that up as well, because I thought, you've been working virtually effectively for a long time before COVID. You're the experts, I reckon. So how did you make that work with those time zones? I mean, was it like one of you's up all night, or what kind of things did you do to make it, at least possible?
I would, it's possible, but there are things I wouldn't advise, or like reminding that you can't do it forever, because it does wear you down, where, it's a lot of early mornings or late nights. And I think some of the things that we did were just like, we committed to trying not to do that every day, or like if one of us had a late night, they shouldn't have an early morning. So like taking turns as much as you could. And also that's where you really have to let go of certain things, where like if you can't attend a meeting because of the time zone, but it's important for Frida, you have to let the other person step in. And I think that's also a good practice of reminding us that I like pushing back against sometimes the cult of leadership, of where you start, while I want to believe I'm like, I can do everything, you have to remind yourself that you're not indispensable in some ways. And I think that's important for the work too, and important for letting other people step in, whether it's Ruby or whether it's other members of the team. But yeah, just around the virtual nature, I think we also invested in time together. We had to see each other face to face. Like, you can't replace that. And that's where we would have at least once or twice a year, like a week dedicated to like as a leadership meeting where we would sort through maybe some of the things that, haven't been able to talk about across different time zones. And, if you're always doing a late night and early morning, one of you is always going to be grumpy or hungry. So, sometimes saving some of that work for when we can actually be face to face. Yeah, I don't know, Ruby, if you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, yes, agree to everything you just said. I think the only other things I would say is like, on a practical sense, we did things to help us get through the fact that we weren't always in a shared time zone, or we weren't in a shared time zone, like having documents where we left each other notes, and like someone goes in and then writes, what do we, so that we wouldn't hold things up. So, and there were some moments where like, I wouldn't say it was necessarily healthy, but we could turn things around very quickly because we were like Devi went to sleep, passed it to me, I finished it. Like, we were kind of working across all of the hours in the world. That was on, just some moments. But I think also like little ways that we would tell each other, like, this is enough, or like, you need to give me space.
Oh. I think, is it?
Present, yeah.
Should I start from me? Oh, just to say, yeah, that, so in a practical sense as well, we used a number of like technical things, I guess, to support each other to have boundaries. And like one was like an emoji, rainbow emoji we'd send each other, like when we were like, no, like this is getting into it, like it's too tense, or like we just need to take time out, or like please stop messaging me about work, it's like 10 p.m. So we'd send it like rainbow, and it was like, okay, this is kind of like the flag of like, please. And that were like little things like that were we just able to support each other. We also just in documents would like leave notes for each other, find ways to kind of throw things back and forth across our time zones and like be accountable to that. But also I think it was just like recognizing when something is someone else's decision and like trusting them fully to do that work, and they just keep you updated, and like being quite clear on what those things were. Like, and like being, I don't know, like we didn't need to be in everything together, but then being really clear of when we really both felt we needed to be part of something, and just navigating that in a bit, like with a lot of open communication, I think helps. And also just remembering like we're not machines, and like we have to make space to like continue to get to know each other and find out what is happening in our lives. And I mean, the simple thing around like checking questions in calls, I mean, I think everyone's doing it hopefully these days in the era of the pandemic, but I think making space for that and seeing that as valuable as the work of like seeing how everyone is doing, and like that became like part of our work together. And I think that's why we're still working together now, because we care about each other. I think it's like.
And I mean, I would still say that like, I'm checking myself because it worked out and we achieved a lot. I wouldn't say some of the things we did were still worth it. I mean, it worked out, but in terms of what Ruby was saying around like, we overworked probably a lot, and we stepped over each other's boundaries, and we still are doing that or trying to figure that out. And I think that's what I was saying about like unlearning a lot of culture. And then also when you get so familiar with each other, you have to also still remind each other about like the boundaries. And when you're still getting to know yourself, like understanding how to verbalize and recognize your own boundaries. But I think, I just do want to still check ourselves around like the grind culture. When there are two people, maybe you feel like you can do even more, but I wouldn't necessarily rush to that either. Just, it's also enough to, have two people achieve the same thing rather than like two people achieving double the work. I would reflect back on that, and maybe there were some times where I think we did too much, for sure.
And that's something about the kind of quality quantity thing, really, in a way, isn't it? It's like you don't have to double everything, you don't have to times by two, but actually there's a qualitative difference in there being two of you, and what you're doing, and the how and the practice and what that means. There's such valuable reflections in what you've shared. I wonder if you're thinking of documenting this in some way, or sharing with other people that are interested in thinking about shared leadership models in future.
Yeah, we hope to. We've been talking about this, and almost like a year ago now, we sort of came together and we're trying to sort of dream up what that would look like. And I think it feels important while it's still fresh. I think for us, we want to try and document something before the end of the year. And I guess have some ideas how to do that creatively. I know, Devi, do you want to share? What should we share? Something's coming up, but yeah, you go ahead, Devi.
No, I think we'll keep it a secret. I mean, we want to document something, and if you know us, we don't like boring reports. So we have some ideas of how we would like to present it in a way that's also somewhat embodied and experiential. But yeah, we are trying to find someone to help us, or support us to do that work, and make sure we have the space and the resources to produce this documentation and sharing back with everybody.
Yeah, and maybe I would also say that I think in the time where since 2013, like we've seen a number of co-executive sort of co-leaders come out in feminist spaces and in women's funds. And I think we also see, like, wherever we can, trying to share some of the experiences we've had, and also just being community with those co-EDs and co-leaders as, as much as is helpful, and support them to do some of the, just the reflection that, like, I wish we'd had a community of learning with other co-EDs just to bounce ideas off, or to be like, what are we doing with this? And like, I think, obviously EDs come together in lots of spaces, but there's something really just transformational about having a duo and then having multiple duos. So I feel like if there's a way to create some space, I think we're kind of keen to, particularly once we've done some of our own documentation, just to share that and see where people are at, and how to support this work.
Well, and actually, we also hope to collect any tips from them that somehow we didn't, figure out. And so we would love to also have this project be a chance to help them document some of their best practices, and we'd love to hear from them.
Yeah, it feels like such an emergent learning space as well. That is, like, people that particularly also how to do this in a pandemic, and what their situation is now, and like how people are sort of constantly learning and unlearning and trying new things. So it's just, I think it'd be great to try and offer back some documentation.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that. Thank you both so much for talking with me today and sharing all your learning and observations and wisdom about shared leadership. I found it really interesting and inspiring, and I'm sure people listening will have too. So thank you both. Stay well.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.